Welcome to the next part of the D4 Repertoire series. In this video we'll be looking at the King's Indian, which arises of course here, and I propose to play e4 first, d6, and now actually I'm going to recommend suggest more than one line here. It really depends on how sharp you want the position to get, and also how much work you want to invest in the line to play here. I'll be recommending two lines that are played quite rarely and one main line. Let's start with the suggestion that will take I think the least work at home so to say, which is the little move h3. I'll explain a bit later what's the idea. Black usually castles, and now bishop g5, and this setup is quite interesting because it's first of all, it's very flexible, and the second issue is that black often doesn't know any specific line against such a little played setup. But if you look it up in a database or online chess games database, you'll see that white has quite decent results with it. One simple point here is that if black goes h6, you just drop the bishop back, and this is also one explanation why white played h3, because without this move black would have knight g4 and would harass the bishop further. Actually h6 already is a little bit of a second-rate move here. It's not advisable for black to weaken the king side with h6. I'll come to that later when I show some other line. So what does black play as main moves here? A little point here is that if black actually goes e5, this already is a big mistake. It might only happen in blitz games, but it's still good to know that the simple exchange and knight d5 already wins material because of the pin and the hanging pawn on c7. So black already has got huge problems. Okay, well, e5 might only happen in shorter time controls. So if black wants to play for e5, which of course is a typical King's Indian move, then he needs to do some preparation. And the most topical move there is knight a6, which covers c7. So this line that I just showed with the exchange on e5 wouldn't be possible. So now what is white playing? White plays bishop d3, now e5, d5. And now we've got an interesting position. We've got the closed center in the middle, which is very typical for the King's Indian, but there's one important point here. White of course hasn't castled short, and he doesn't intend to. And one idea here is to play the move g4. I'll do a sample line, maybe queen a8 to unpin the knight in order to play maybe knight h5 and then f5. Then white really plays g4, and one idea here is to play knight e2 to g3, which would be very nice to control the f5 point. So black will have a real hard time to play f5. Let's say knight d7, which is the main move. Also to play maybe knight d to c5 and then f5. Now white actually can play even a3 f5 and b4. And this of course leads to a huge space advantage for white, and black also has a little bit of a problem piece on a6. This knight is not doing anything at all. I would think that white is a bit better in this line. Generally speaking, this type of position where white is able to play g4 is very interesting, because it really pushes black back, and quite often, if he doesn't know what he's doing, leads to almost automatic wins for white because of the huge advantage in space. Another idea here for black is to play entirely differently. Just one thing. If you look at this position again, just imagine black would have played h6 at some point. Then white would drop back to e3. And in this position, the move h6 would be really bad, because it would just weaken the king side. At one point it might be possible to rip open the king side with g5 or h4, h5. h6 is just a weakness. So this is also the reason why on the 6th move here h6 is already a bit dubious. Let's look at something else. c5 is also, of course, an idea which is often played. Then white goes for the Benoni here, e6, bishop d3, e takes d5, c takes d5. And this is a pretty typical Benoni setup, where h3 and bishop g5 are rather useful moves, and white will just continue with knight f3 and short castle. Of course, this requires a bit of study of the middle games, but it's not a huge amount of theory or something. And also white's results are excellent in this position. So h3, bishop g5 is an interesting sideline, which is really worth looking into. I think maybe the best line for black actually is something like this, and then play really exact moves. For instance, at this point where I mentioned queen e8, it's also possible to go for c6, knight e2, cd5, cd5, knight c5, bishop c2, a position like this. But this is also quite nice to play for white. You still have the g4, knight g3 idea, but you can also try to go for b4. It's a very important point that white is very flexible with his king. He doesn't necessarily castle short. In fact, this happens really rarely in this line, and this way doesn't give black an easy target on the king side, because a lot of King's Indian play are really looking forward to push f5, g5, and so on, to get a simple attack on the king. So this is an interesting offbeat line, but it's sound. You'll find really a lot of grandmaster games played with this. For instance, you find games by Evgeny Bareev or Lev Psakis, who's an interesting player anyway. So it's worth studying. Another line I might suggest as an offbeat try, but this requires much more work. In fact, it's something for people who really like to play extremely sharp and maybe prepare something at home, which is move f4. It's of course the most aggressive way to play, but it's interesting. It's interesting. For instance, black doesn't have so many options here. He can basically only try two main lines. One is knight a6 with the idea to play e5 later. An example line runs bishop d3, bishop g4. Also possible, instead of bishop g4, of course, is e5, which leads to this kind of position. This one possible line, and this I think should be slightly better for white. After bishop g4, let's continue a few moves. Here black came up with an interesting tactical sequence with e5. I guess this will only happen if black really studied the line. Fe5 and now c5, which is a very nice point as it breaks up the center. White needs to play d5 now, as a move like ed6, cd4 yeah, just forks two pieces, because here the pin on f3 is helping black. So d5, knight takes e5, bishop e2, and then continue a few moves. And this position also looks a bit better for white. Another entirely different approach on move 6, of course, is c5, which is played very often. And there you can actually choose between a really sharp main line and another line which is interesting and a little bit less studied. d5 is the main move, but you could also consider looking at dc5, queen a5, bishop d3, queen c5, oops, not here, queen e2 of course. And this is also interesting to play, bishop e3 and short castle to come. And white has got some nice play, maybe on the king side, based on the two aggressive pawns on e4 and f4. And also a3 and b4 might be an idea. It's all about grabbing space. d5 of course is the main move, which leads to Benoni type of position, and this can get extremely sharp. One possibility, for instance, is here rook e8, and then white even pushes on. In this position it goes on and on. White can play moves like e6 takes and d6 or bishop g5 is an idea, queen b6 and then queen b6, and then I think even short castle is a move, queen d2. It's very sharp. This is not the kind of line you like to play well and think all of here and think up all the moves at the board. It's something you want to study at home and then really try to get your opponent in the opening who maybe doesn't know exactly what is happening, and you can just reproduce the moves you looked at before. Yeah, it's a matter of taste, but it requires a lot of work to play this way. Another idea could be bishop g4 in this position instead of rook e8, and another line just to show how sharp this position can be. Here would be g4, h6 and even h4. Yeah, with g5 to come. Yeah, it's really a line for people who want to attack in a very direct fashion. So two offbeat lines, one h3, and which is really a solid line. You can, I think, look at maybe 10-20 good grandmaster games and study the kind of positions that come up, and then you can play this. So it doesn't require so much work. f4 on the other hand is a move for people who like to invest a bit of time at home and want to really attack directly. So it's a good choice here between very aggressive and work involved and well, a positionally well-founded line, which is also not without its points, but you can, I think, just play this after studying a couple of games and try this out a bit at Blitz maybe, and then you can also easily try this in a long time control game. In the next video I do a second one on the King's Indian. I actually present the main choice I'm recommending, which will be the Sämisch variation with f3 on move 5. Please also watch this video, and questions or comments are welcome, of course.